Hello, everyone, and welcome to this upcoming session. I'm Dava Haley Mitchell, and I am deeply honored to be bringing a conversation to you with MonicaSharma. Monica is someone you may not be familiar with, but she is someone I personally consider one of my sheroes. She has done so many amazing things in her life, but one of the things that's really inspired me about her is that she has really taken the depths of psychological and spiritual work and applied them in practice in a very large scale way when she was working at the United Nations. She was the Director of Leadership and Capacity Development there. And she worked there from 1988 to 2010. And during that time, took so many of the ideas that I hold dear and was really looking at how do we scale transformation. So that really inspired me. And now she has gone on to author a beautiful book, which I have here, Radical Transformational Leadership. And this is a book that is applicable for people who are the laymen, laywomen, but also for policymakers. And she is really looking at how do we create large scale, as it says, strategic action for change agents. She is also the Tata Chair Professor in the Tata Institute of Social Sciences in Mumbai, India. She works as an international expert and practitioner on leadership development for equitable and sustainable change, working still with the UN, with universities, management institutions, governments, non-governmental organizations, businesses, media, and other organizations. So she is someone with such a rich background, and we're so happy to have you here. Welcome, Monica.
Thank you, Diva. It's a pleasure to be with you, knowing that shift makes such a difference in shifting our consciousness for action. So yes, here I am. Thank you for inviting me.
You are so welcome. Well, let's just dive right back into the heart of your work. And maybe you can share with us a little bit about the inner capacities that we have and how we can really source those for strategic action and get leverage in the outside world.
We've always known this, Diva, but now we have evidence. And we have evidence that human beings, of course, have our limbic system and our emotional centers, but we also have this higher consciousness. And there are three things that seem to be common in human beings worldwide that are just innate in us. First, our sense of self, our sense of our dignity, our sense of who we are, our self-awareness. So I call that dignity. And respect around the world is about including this aspect of myself and others in every strategy that I design. The second thing that's lovely, you know, Oxfam had a report. It was called Even It Up, their 2015 report. And I read in that surveys that were done in the US that showed that over 90% of people value fairness. They value equity. I mean, ask children. If you have two kids and you're going to cut a cake for them, like you give one a smaller slice and the other bigger one, I mean, like they are not just going to say, that's fine. We have that innate in us, you know, a sense of fairness. The question is, does our education, does our socialization activate the space? Are we willing to transform our mindset from one from scarcity to one from abundance? Because that's what our world is. So there is the sense of dignity, there is our sense of equity and fairness, and then there is this third component. And that component we call compassion. And compassion, actually, the way I'm interpreting it, is very much like derived from the Sanskrit word karuna. And karuna means my heart is broken open so that I'm called to act. Guess what? It's like that worldwide. So if we can be radical, by radical, I don't mean out of the box. I mean the root of, that's what the word radical means in the Oxford Dictionary. The root of ourselves is based on our innate dignity, equity, and compassion. And what if I manifest this, source it, in a way that works? In the book you just quoted, Radical Transformational Leadership, there are stories from all over the world, people from all walks of life, whether they are hazifs or they are policymakers or they are change agents, they can tap into this huge potential we each have. How great is that?
It's amazing. And I think it's so needed right now. And one of the things that I know so many people, especially in my more spiritually oriented community, people are really waking up in a new way where people want to be engaged. People want to be change agents and really want to take the depths of their soul practice into the world. And yet what I find is that many people, they try in smaller ways and they end up getting sort of frustrated or feel sometimes a bit hopeless that when they look out at the world, the challenges seem so big and so many that it can feel like this sense of overwhelm and like that they can't really make much of a difference as one person. And so I know that, you are an example of someone who has made big change as one person, but what do you think people can start doing? Where do you encourage people to begin that journey to really create impact and start, shifting the needle on different important social issues from wherever they are in their life right now?
So the book is written that way, and I keep referring to the book because I think that people who view this may wish to delve deeper into it.
Yes, do check out this book. It's really powerful and very lovely. And
so what we can do is to, what I say, activate our innate abilities. We have innate sort of strengths like our dignity, equity, universal values of compassion, but we also have abilities, and we have not activated these abilities as a seamless whole. So the spiritual community activates who they are and what they care about deeply. Then there is the world of policy and programming that has attributed to itself the expertise of actually designing for change. But guess what? What we know is every human being has a systems mind. Look at how we think about the future of our child. Look at how we are architects of our lives. We are systems thinkers. We may not be mathematicians and we may not be formal systems thinkers, but activating that part of myself will allow me to ask the right question. What is the norm that needs to shift for the result I wish? For example, if the result I wish is to look at ending homelessness, it doesn't matter what the result is, or it's about education for young children, for everyone. Whatever is that result, can I ask the question, what needs to shift in the system so that my intervention is sustainable? And what needs to shift in our norms, in the way we look at each other, such that it's going to be different? So basically what we are inviting people to do is to activate their innate abilities in action. And that means sourcing my spiritual self or my inner potential, designing to make a difference, and the templates are given, templates used by everybody, and templates used by policymakers and change agents are given. So I learned this template, it's very easy to learn.
Could you give us an example of a template? So if people,
So a template, it would be like, how do I connect through 6 questions? And it's, I won't give you the page number of the book. It's called the conscious full spectrum response, as different from partial responses. Not that what we've done is wrong, but we've not interconnected and interwoven the alchemy of who we are with how we think and what we do. So it's really a template with 6 questions that says, what will you do? And what are the direct causes of the problem? What system do you need to shift? And what energies will you source for that from within? So it's an expression of your own greatness. I'll give you 2 pieces of good news. So the first thing is, citizens and people say, oh, the problem is so big. And I am just an individual. What can I do? The good news is the question is the wrong question. It's no longer how big am I, or how big is my project, or how small it is. The question is it strategic? And we use a construct from nature for this, and we call it a fractal. So a fractal, in simple words, is a pattern that repeats itself. So Deva, what if everybody at home, when they bring up their children, what if everybody, when they are working in their workplace or in society, they are able to connect my and others' inner potential and values to strategic change and action? And that's what the book says. So basically, it's possible. It's not about big or small. The question is my work at home, at my workplace, and in society strategic as a fractal to be able to move the whole? Second piece of good news. So scale is different today than it used to be yesterday. So yesterday, we needed to have patterns of scale, again described, patterns of scale that were more like, here is a standard technology, let's replicate it, let's repeat it. Let's say Starbucks, or let's say a store, or let's say a franchise, so scale was repeating that pattern. Then we came up with scale related to technology. For example, we had many more schools than we have colleges, because not everyone from school will go to a college, and not everyone from college will go to a university. So whether it's the education system, legal system, healthcare system, we scale it according to technology. Then came the third thing. And the third thing is networks and meshworks, where we can learn from each other's ideas. And however, that is connection at scale. That's not results at scale. The good news is that we can create a new field of change based on this fractal, whether I'm a large corporation or I'm an individual, whether I'm in government or anywhere else. And so for me, equity, dignity, and compassion are beyond political party lines, are beyond religion, are beyond our ideological stance. It is really based on humanity. Mm-hmm. So people are getting that we can retain our affiliations to wherever we are affiliated, but we can transcend the exclusionary divisive forces of these different identities and really move. So it's so exciting. And then there are studies that say that if 10% of people move, the planet will move. Wow.
That is exciting. Yeah. I mean, let's get really practical. So as someone's, listening to this, I look at my world around me, and I'm hoping other people can relate to this too. So we live in an area where the schools are not very good. And, so Stephen and I have been talking about this, I think there's the scorecard for our local schools is like 5 out of 10. We have a young daughter, and we of course want to give her a great education. So, one option is, okay, well, we can just pull her out of the public school system and put her into a private school. But if we choose not to do that, and looking at our small school as probably a fractal of the larger whole, which is, here in the United States, it's pretty appalling that, our education level is so low compared to, many other countries even. And so, so the small fractal of my local school is a piece of this larger problem, which is that the school system, at least, here in the United States, seems to be not working very well. And so, as I said, you can get overwhelmed and say, forget it, we're just going to forget the system and put our daughter somewhere else. But another option would be, okay, how do we really work on the system and create and shift the norms, shift the patterns in the school system? So as a small example, how would you start thinking about that in a strategic way so that whatever energy we apply into this can be well used, so that we're making good use of our time and effort? And this could apply for whatever change you might be seeing that you want to create in your life. But I'm just trying to make it real practical for people, because I think it is.
So the evidence shows that the space of greatest impact, by impact I mean result, is the ability to shift our worldview. So what this means is that I'm able to source values to shape strategy. So that's point number one. How does that look? I'm able to see what success means. I'm able to challenge the current material paradigm of what success means for a young child. And there's fabulous work going on this, whether it's health and healing, whether it's education, whether it's the legal system. People are beginning to wake up. Second, I need to be able to work upstream and downstream. So let me begin with downstream. So in my view, your question is so valuable because, Diva, it's not about running away from what's not working. It's about actually making the difference that will not only be for your own school, but the schools around. So the first thing is, how is it that we are okay spending money on destruction, but not on investing on the most precious assets of humanity? So unless we really, truly value them, we are not going to invest in them. So I think that we
How do you shift that, right? That's exactly right. So then how do you shift people to care more about education?
So we break open our hearts and then our minds. And there are so many stories in the book about how people have shifted norms. And I will give you a different example so that you and I can talk about education.
Perfect.
So let's take an example in the book, which is that in Africa, we were working with these methods, and there is what they call bright price. And basically when a man died of AIDS, the property went back to the family that was part of the man's family. So the woman is left as a widow without any means. And we walked through this work. And the next morning, a woman stood up and said, I stand for equity. And I realize that what we are doing is not equitable. So I have decided to challenge the norm and go back and do what's required to support my sister-in-law. And she did. When one human being stands up and says, you know what, this is what I see, and this is how it will move, others will come to that space. So the big thing is, do I know how to create spaces of inquiry that can ask the right questions that will then bring in the quality and that will bring in the support? So for me, human beings have created that structure, so we can change it. And the fact is, Diva, there are enough people asking your question. So then I will work it school by school. I will then work the resource base that's required. I will then use that school to change policy. So I'll give you an example out of Oakland, for example. There was a program that was started with teen dating violence. And we used—
And this is Oakland, California, right? So this is right in my home.
Yes, yes.
Not my town.
And using these tools, a group of people reduced teen dating violence from 76% to 26% in 1 year, where teenagers were leading that change, realizing what they could do. So for me, I need to trust that human beings, when they activate their compassionate heart and their mind, are able to make that shift. And they have. And so for me, the question really is, am I willing to challenge myself and step up to learn a few new tools and actually make that difference? Am I willing to design? Because basically, the problems you and I are facing, whether that's education or health or energy, are because of the decisions we've made, Diva. It is not that it is generically that way. We can shift those. We can create an alternative, criticize by creating alternatives that look at three things: a vibrant school, active parents in that school, so that's the one thing, the quality that we wish, to redefine what success means, to be able to have our kids be viable but happy, and not just viable and materialistic. I then need to also look at policy changes. And the biggest three policy changes are, can we make education an investment in the society instead of welfare? Can we look at transforming GDP from more to better? Can we look at budgets that will resource our schools and not say we care and actually not care?
Mm-hmm. I think I love your roadmap there, and it makes so much sense. I think for many people who are in the spiritual communities, there can be this like policy change feels like something so foreign to people, where they don't really know how to engage policy change. And again, maybe you can just share a little bit about, I think like anything, when you just don't know about it, then it feels really foreign. And Stephen and I have taken it upon ourselves we fly out to Washington, D.C. and to get some training from an organization there that we like a lot. It's called Friends Committee for National Legislation, but they really train people in very simple lobbying, that we are citizens, and of course every country is different, and this summit represents women from many different countries. But in our country, it's been, a simple education process to learn, like, how do we affect change? How do we go to our local representatives? How do we talk to them? How do we bring together the people who have the pieces of information, the data to, make a change and get enough people together who are interested to show up at the same time to talk about something. So it was something that I have to say before, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, I didn't really have any knowledge of, and now it's something that I feel really comfortable with. And so wherever you live, what would you say to people who maybe have never done policy shift work before, but how can people start to get engaged in that level of change?
So you bring up 3 issues, So the first thing is that we've had too much literature that divides doing and being. Mm-hmm. And that as if being means we should not do, and being means that we just are within ourselves. So for me, the moment I wake up, you wake up, your baby wakes up, we are actually, reaping the benefits of labor worldwide. And so that's a fact, right? So being and doing has been made into a separate spaces. And I recall a lecture I did once in a spiritual community, and they said, well, she's all about doing. And then the same lecture in the UN was, well, she's all about being. It's not about being or doing, it's about the same thing. The second is, yes, I think we should learn how to deal with legislation, but legislation that actually has the foresight to be dynamic. So I think the difference between legislation for justice and justice alone, as different from legislation that's based on justice, dignity, and compassion, is the following. The first is legislation can become a very self-righteous place rather than a righteous place. So how do I ensure my spiritual, depth as I continue working with policy? Now, policy has become a very sophisticated word, so this is my third point, is that we need to demystify what policy means. Policy is nothing but rules of the game that we can't see, and rules of the game that influence our daily lives. So basically, the moment we realize that policy is nothing but invisible rules that have been put in place by somebody at some time, some of them are empowering and some of them are disempowering, then we relate to policy like we relate to any game. No, there are rules. So am I not interested? So there are rules for food, for example. Today's world, we talk of nutritious food. Are there not rules? Like we shouldn't have certain types of food. If you have that illness, if you're a diabetic, you don't douse yourself with sugar, that kind of stuff. But there are rules. So those rules are what are guiding education. They're guiding health. And we have made those rules. It's incumbent on today's citizen to look at the interdependent forces, not independent forces. After all, spirituality, Diva, is about interdependence. It's not about me, I. And so can I step up and say, I will look at these interdependent phenomena that actually impinge on each other. So today, when you transform law, Diva, and you and Stephen do that, then you will transform other systems because they are interconnected. And so for me, the conversation is, am I willing to see that policy is not a big deal, a mystified something? And that in policy, I must understand leverage. Leverage means, how do I enter the space? And any space is good enough as a leverage point for policy change if I'm willing to just design to make it differently. The architect in me, the unifying architect. So we are at once the contemporary pioneer that sources our inner wisdom. We have the ability to be a unifying architect. That's what we do for our kids. That's what we do at home. We have that ability. We also know how to implement mindfully. We have, new ways of being in the now, of being able to lighten our stereotyping and our psychological baggage. And for the first time, we are all able to work at scale.
Well, maybe one thing that you could talk a little bit more about is there's one thing about acting ourselves and feeling inspired, but I know another thing that you talk about is how do you inspire other people to act as well? And maybe you could share a little bit about that process.
Yes, since we are talking about women, why don't I take up a women's issue?
Let's talk about it. Yes.
Yeah, let's talk about it. How do we inspire others? And how did we inspire others? So let's take maybe a couple of issues related to women that we face worldwide. One of them is, cultures revere us. In every culture, there's a place for women, but there's also in every culture norms that disenfranchise women and men, because it's not about women, it's about the feminine and the masculine in men and women. So how did we inspire people to act? So the first thing is that let's take a thing like female genital mutilation, or let's take maternal mortality. And the South Asian example in the book where, we reduce maternal mortality. How did we do that? So the first thing we did is we said that, reducing maternal mortality requires technical intervention. When a woman is bleeding to death, she requires support. When she has obstructed labor, she requires support. Can we put that technical solution in place? But it's not a technical issue. It's much more. It's a woman's ability to speak for herself, her self-determination. So we looked at the cultural norms of what prevented people and what were the norms that had women actually participate in her own decision-making in cultures that are relatively more conservative and do not think that that's what should happen. But we sourced it from people's innate values and what they care about. And there are beautiful stories of a man in Bangladesh, for example, broke open the door of his hut to take his wife on a stretcher with his neighbors. I mean, it's so touching. They had so little. And yet I have seen in the same country, women die of obstructed labor. So the potential for caring exists. How do I inspire it? I inspire it through concrete action, number one, because there's nothing as inspiring as action when people see change. Second, it's amazing, Diva, that people worldwide actually understand the underlying patterns of what creates that problem. If I can activate that space as I am solving the problem, I inspire. And then I speak up. Because when we don't speak up, we just allow things to be. And we speak up not out of anger and frustration, though that too, and resentment, but we speak up because we are going to create a new reality and we are not going to tolerate what's not working.
Yeah, that's...
So today's technology, every woman can be saved. I mean, not every, but almost. And so what is it that we will not invest in it? So to me, the foundation of this work, I would call it, a good way to say it is isms, right? So we have so many isms, ideological isms. sexism, classism, racism, casteism, tribalism, and fundamentalism. So every ism most probably started with some value base and then got very much ideologically fossilized in our egos and our identity, and so becomes a divisive force. How do we break that pattern? Because if we have to break that pattern, I need to know how to do it. And so for me, there are examples of how we've broken that pattern on racism, how we've broken that pattern on to think outside the box. And yes, it hasn't become mainstream, but that's how new ideas start. They don't become mainstream. And everyone will look at interrupting sexism, racism, classism, casteism, fundamentalism, all are exclusionary forces from these three innate abilities. And so for me, you know what? We suddenly have new openings, Deva. We have openings for every citizen.
It's very exciting. It's really exciting. And we're coming to the end of our time, but I just have one last thing I wanted to ask you about, because I do find it so remarkable. What I saw you doing, and I know you were collaborating very deeply with Jean Houston for a period of time, but you were bringing, you know, these very, would seem kind of innovative ideas, spiritual, psychological principles into the heart of the United Nations, which is, you know, a more mainstream, more entrenched system. And you're able to actually utilize a lot of these principles in ways that, you know, I've certainly have never heard of it happening before. And I'm wondering how you were able, also as an inspiration to others who might be in other kind of institutional settings, how are you able to bring in some of those kinds of principles to create new ways of doing things at the UN? Because I know that you impacted many thousands of people, and I think 90 different countries were impacted by the new work that you're bringing in.
So I'd like to broaden the base of my partnership and be correct in the attribution. I have worked with roughly 50 people like Jean. Wow. So there are different people, and I have learned things from them. But what really made the difference was the following three principles. Number one, I generate the results that the institution requires. For example, when we worked on HIV and AIDS, our result was to reduce stigma and discrimination against people living with HIV and AIDS. Second, it was to get treatment access to people. So I will always work for a result, and I will then do so that's what I will do. And then I will design the systems to make the difference. So that is principle number two. We deliver on the institutional results, we transform the system, and we do a third thing. We will always activate the inner potential of people and never impose prescriptions on them. And so the result, their innate ability and the ability to design the system was what made the difference, whether that was HIV and AIDS, whether that was reducing maternal mortality, whether that was addressing female genital mutilation. So it doesn't matter. And so basically those were the three things. So I'm very clear that I'm born in a beautiful era where I can draw upon the greatness of many people. And I have, I think the greatest learning for me is the potential of human beings who are willing to stand up and address cultural norms and systems in a way that they are, you know, creating a new future. So that's how I'm committed to that. And I think the reason it works for me is, frankly, Diva, I gain the most, you know, in the sense that when I open up my inner space and I resonate with you and with others from that space, there is something that falls away and that something beautiful emerges. And that's an everyday phenomenon, you see? And then I see change, I see a result. I see more people have treatment. I see people included. For example, in Cambodia, the people living with HIV were had to leave the village. At the end of this, they were part of the village and they worshipped in temples along with everyone else. that embrace and that thing, you cannot mandate it. I can only realize it. I can only unfold from that space. But then I challenge that space, right? So it's about speaking up. It's about having the courage to call out what's not working, which unfortunately the spiritual community does not always do,
Right.
because it's beyond our comfort zone. So I think stretching beyond our comfort zone is important.
Mm-hmm. I definitely agree with that. And well, I know we are at the end of our time here, but I want to just, again, thank you. Every time I hear you speak, I am re-inspired. I feel like you are someone that I definitely want to continue to learn from. And the way that you are taking, these core ideas and then really finding ways to leverage them into not only our local community, but onto a much wider scale, I think is really, really inspiring. And I so appreciate who you are and all you've done and the light that you continue to be. I want to encourage people to check out her book, again, Radical Transformational Leadership. It is filled with beautiful stories, and I have it sitting next to it's on my coffee table now, but after this conversation, it's moving to the bedside table, because this is really a stand for what I believe in and what I want to put my own life towards in the world, is making bigger systems change. So thank you, Monica. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for all you've done and for inspiring us all through your beautiful work.
Thank you, Diva. It's been a pleasure to be with you. It's our choice, right? To engage the way you and I are engaging or not. It's a choice.
It's a choice.
Thank you.
Blessings and thank you again.
Thank you.